Conversations with Garmamie. We're joined by a boxer. Her name is Marija Curran. How you doing, Marija?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing good. So I'm excited to be interviewing you. Just tell us a little bit about your background in boxing as an amateur competitor.
Sure. So I've been doing a little bit of boxing on and off since, a little bit. It would amp up at certain times. I've been boxing on and off since I was about 15. When I was 10, I started doing traditional jiu-jitsu, and I was really competitive in that. And eventually, when I was about 15, I wanted to improve my hand game, so I started taking boxing classes. So I never boxed until as an adult, but I did do classes here and there with an official boxing coach. Then I got serious about boxing after grad school. I had a little bit of an unhealthy student lifestyle, and so I was like, I should get fit again. How am I going to do that? And I love jiu-jitsu, so I was like, I'm going to do jiu-jitsu again. And then, but in that time when I was in school, MMA had taken off, so I went to go join a jiu-jitsu club, and I was like, I can't afford to do this. It's too expensive. So instead, I signed up for boxing. I was doing it recreationally at first, but I did have a pretty extensive fighting background, so I was quickly put on into the competitive program, and I'm a very competitive person, so I jumped on that. And so I would say, I guess in 2014, 15, I had my first boxing fight, and and then it just took off from there. I got my national championship a year or two after that, and then I made national team, and I was on national team for 2 years. So I was boxing really competitively from 2015 to 2019, and I retired then, and now I'm transitioning into coaching.
Now that's really interesting. You're saying that you initially were involved in jiu-jitsu and you were very competitive in that, and I guess that natural drive for competition transferred over into your boxing. But tell us a little bit more, if you don't mind, about your background in jiu-jitsu and what got you involved in that grappling sport. Because now, of course, you transition. Well, it's a grappling and striking, but you transition from grappling and striking to pure striking.
Yeah. So a big part of my fighting career, fighting lifestyle is that I grew up, I'm the youngest of 5 kids. And in particular, I have 3 older brothers right above me. And so I got beat up a lot growing up. That's how they showed affection to each other. They're just it was your rough and tumble kind of household. And so if you wanted to have any attention or a playmate, you had to fight. So we kind of grew up scrapping a lot. And they also, all 3 of my brothers played competitive hockey. So my parents wanted to make my one brother a little more tough for hockey, because he's just a gentle soul. And so they put him into jiu-jitsu, and I was just desperate for attention and an activity for myself to do. And the boys got so much attention through hockey that when they said they're putting my brother Mario into jiu-jitsu, I said, I'm going too. And so they let me go, and then I just got it. And because I was so tough and I was a strong kid, I did really well at that right away, and succeeded in tournaments as a white belt, and just ran with it. So, and I was really competitive. I had national titles in jiu-jitsu too. It's wow. Traditional jiu-jitsu, so it's a bit a bit more disorganized than than a lot of more structured sports. But yeah, no, I had a lot of success, and it was great.
And as far as that competitive drive, to compete, how much of that do you think was instilled due to the fact that you, as you mentioned, you came from a household where sports were taken seriously? It seemed that you had older brothers involved in sports. And did you always have that competitive drive, or was that something that was kind of augmented over the years?
I think it's something genetic. My parents were always very competitive too. Everyone in my household was very competitive. Everything from who cleans something better to who looks the best. Like it was always, everything was a competition, and it can be a positive or a negative, like like anything in life. But I think it was just the nature of the household I grew up in. Definitely some parental leadership on that reinforced in our upbringing.
Right on. That's very interesting. We'll come back to that, but I just want to jump now into boxing. Can you tell us, can you give us the characteristics that would define a boxer and the sport of boxing in general? And I'm doing hand gestures.
Yeah, it's interesting. What defines a boxer? Like, what are the characteristics you want in boxing? I think it differs depending on the type of boxer and what you're dealing with. But I guess there has to be some overlap. And I think all boxers, you have to have a very strong sense of self. Like you have to believe in yourself. You have to believe that you're the best, or you can be the best, because or else you're going in defeated, and there's nothing worse than that. So like a strong sense of self and determination. I think all boxers, and all combative fighters, they're very brave. Like you have to be brave to get into a ring or a cage and just go toe to toe with someone. Like you for sure have to be brave. So strong sense of self, bravery. And if you're going to do it right, I think another characteristic would be committed. Like you can't just play. You don't play boxing. You can't just dilly daddle. Like if you're going to do it, you're going to do it right, or else you're going to face the consequences of not doing it right. So I think I'd say those three characteristics.
Interesting. Now, how would you define yourself as a boxer in terms of style, skill, strategy, all of the above, personality? How would Marija describe Marija as a boxer?
Interesting. I thought you might ask this. So, and I was like, I don't know. How am I? So I asked my coach, who I'm still very, very close with. I'm like, how would you describe me as a boxer? And she said, tenacious, that I wouldn't back down from a challenge. And she also said very methodical. She said I was a thinker, very process oriented. For instance, like even just at major events, for even my warm up, I'd have a little Post-it note I'd put on the wall, and would have like, if I'm about 6, here's what I need to do during round 1, round 2, round 3, and like leaving time for a buffer round in case there's a stoppage in one of the other fights. So very methodical, I think.
That's really fascinating that she described you as that. That's really interesting. Now, in terms of like Marija the boxer and everyday Marija, are they the same, or are they distinctly different?
They are,
particularly when you're in the ring, fighting or training. Is it the same sort of person, or are they slightly different? How would you differentiate?
it's a little different. Like I think professional regular Marija is a lot nicer than Marija in the ring. Like I think I'm a very kind person, very considerate, but in boxing you can't be kind, you can't be considerate. You actually have to be quite selfish. You have to put yourself before others. You have to look out for your own interests. Like for instance, Marija now, she would never miss a friend's birthday or whatever, but when I was a competitor, like all you think about is boxing and your life revolves around it, and everything else comes second. So they are a bit different, but there definitely is a lot of overlap too. I do think I'm methodical in how I approach life and work. I am very, I wouldn't say tenacious, but very driven. Like I have goals and I make plans to achieve them. So there's definitely overlap, but I don't think about punching people in the face at work or on the street, whereas I thought about it a lot when I was boxing.
For sure. And just to give you context, the reason why I asked that, because sometimes, we know that personality tends to, at least in the way we see it as spectators and fans, when it comes to various combat sports, it seems that personality seems to drive, or at least frame, our perspective of fighters. You know what I mean? So that's why I asked, like, does that cross over into one's in-ring actual capability, or does it influence it? When you talk about someone who's driven and organized, well, that's we're going to assume this is someone who's going to attend practice, who's going to plan things out, who's going to take their diet seriously. But just going back to what you were saying there in terms of that level of commitment involved as a former elite competitor like yourself, can you paint that picture for us? Because it seems like it's a big commitment. You can't kind of like 50-50 it, right? You have to go all in 100%. And that takes a lot of, I would imagine, discipline. And speak to us about that level of commitment. I guess paint a picture of what your routine was like back in the day when you were competing at the international level and had to remain so somewhat extremely focused.
Sure. So, day in the life of Marija the boxer back in the day. I should preface this by saying that I did not fight in an Olympic weight class. So I was not part of the centralized national team. When you're on the national team and you're in an Olympic weight class, typically you centralize. So you work out of Montreal from the training center there, and like your job is to train as an athlete. I was not in an Olympic weight class. That was not the case for me. I trained there often, but I wasn't centralized. I had a full-time job as a public servant. So my experience is probably a lot different than a lot of other elite athletes. But that being said, it was like, it was a lifestyle entirely in itself. So every day I would wake up, I would train in the morning. And then I go to work. I leave work and I go and train again. And then I come home, you eat and you sleep. And that was my life. And what type of training and when I trained and how I did it, honestly, I had a really amazing coaching team around me and support team. So they would just schedule my life. I'd say, here's what I need to do. I need to be at work from 9 to 5 or whatever my outside of boxing commitments were. And then they just make the plan for me. And I just have to follow you trust the process. Like they find the pieces, they didn't know what you need. So then you just, of course I give feedback, but I just follow the plan and trust my coach in particular, my head coach, and just follow the plan. And it made it easy in a way. It was hard because you don't have a life. Right. Everything is, you wake up, box, work, box, eat, sleep. But it's easy in a way because you don't need to make the decisions. You have a team, an entire team, a strength coach, sports psychologist, physiotherapist, your head coach, everyone's there behind you, just making the plan for you. You just have to deliver on it. And you want to deliver on it to say thank you to those people.
Very interesting. So those relationships and the support sort of team, if I can call it that, all around these athletes are very important in their development. Speak to us in terms of your sports psychologist. How much of that assisted you in your fighting, and how much of that can you take away in your non-fighting life in terms of having a sports psychologist? Is there crossover between, fighting in the ring and training and having that sort of expert advice? And does that cross over into everyday life? Because as a working professional in the field of communications and so on?
Yeah. I'll start with the boxing. I think having a sports psychologist is key for any high performance athlete, especially in a combative sport. It's so mental, like obviously physical too, but the mental aspect of it, you have to be mentally strong. And like anything, you have to work on that. And I'm very much an evidence-based approach kind of person. So why would I rely on Marija, who has no background in this, to make the plan for that, right? If I want to exercise my mind and train my mind to be in the best position to deliver, I'm going to go to the best professionals I can to support me to do that. So that's when you work with a sports psychologist. In particular, it was helpful to work with him in the lead up to major tournaments, and they just get you on track, give you a plan on exercises to work your muscles mentally. And then I do think that transfers over into day-to-day non-boxing life as well. I think like mental health is wickedly important for everyone. Like being in the pandemic right now, we can feel it more than ever. And so, and again, like just like you go to the doctor to get a checkup to make sure you're physically okay. And I think working on your health mentally and working with professionals mentally is something that you should do mental checkups as well. So I do think it transfers over into the non-boxing realm. Like no one needs to tackle these things alone. You need to rely on those around you, and there's resources. Like there's always a way to do things better. So rely on experts to tell you on how to do that.
For sure. And if I may, just as a follow-up, in terms of that topic of mental health in combat sports, and particularly your sport of boxing, do people openly talk about these issues? I know that, in the general public, there's still some stigma when we talk about mental health. And I know that obviously these stigmas are being, addressed through various public campaigns and so on, but particularly within the community of boxing, how openly do people talk about mental health issues? Sorry, I know I'm putting you on the spot.
No, I love this. I think in boxing we don't talk about mental health enough. And this, I'm not saying this is the reason why, but I do think it's something to think about. Boxing is a very male-dominated sport. There's more male coaches, there's more male athletes, there's more male officials. And I'm not saying guys can't open up about their feelings, but there's some like cultural norms where it's less talked about, particularly feelings and mental health with men. So I think that permeates into how boxing's run as a sport. So I don't think it's talked about a lot. And I feel very fortunate to have had a female head coach where we talked about it a lot, and it was on our radar to make sure that I was as mentally fit as I could be. So, and again, I'm not saying that it's strictly a gender thing, but I do think it plays a role. It's also a very it's a very old school sport, and like everything, like there's a strength and weakness to that. And sometimes it's just like push through, get the work done, train. But obviously if someone's struggling, they're not going to feel comfortable coming forward with that kind of attitude going on. And that's very much, you still see it in a lot of clubs in the boxing community, I find.
That's really interesting. And we can dive into the topic of gender later on, because I do have some questions on that. I think it's in terms of the theme of inclusion and having more female competitors in boxing. I think all combat sports certainly need to have more of that in it. I know some sports are leading the way more than others, but anyways, in terms of, I want to shift to the topic of competition and your best memory as a boxer in terms of your boxing career. Can you tell us what is that special moment that you think of whenever you need that kind of like that emotional that upper where you're like, yes, I remember that moment. It was incredible in terms of your boxing. Okay, can you? I'm sure you probably have more than one, but if you could tell us one story around that, please.
Yeah. I do have many, but there's one that comes to mind in particular. It was I was at a tournament, and it was in, where was it? Bulgaria. I was in Bulgaria, and I was at a national team event. And I was fortunate enough that my coach had applied to be a support staff coach for the event, because usually you travel with the national team coaches, and she was accepted. So I was so lucky in the sense that I had my personal coach there, although she wasn't the first person in the ring, like the person who's talking to you in the ring. But so I was in the gold medal bout after I had one match with a Russian, and I had won. And then I had another Russian, and Russians are tough boxers, like tough people. And so the gold medal round was with this Russian girl, and I think she was ranked like 7th in the world in that weight class. So high ranked, like it was a tough bout. And I came out, and the first round I got lit up. It was not a good round for Marija. And so I was just like, it was brutal. And so we pulled it around, and I came back to the corner. I got good feedback from both my coaches. And so went out and had a really great second round. I probably won that round, but I also got a point deducted. So at this point, I've lost the first round. If I had won the second,
Sorry, you got a point deducted for what?
Low head. You need to have your head up. And so I was kind of burrowing into her as a smaller, stockier boxer. So I wanted to get in the inside, but I was not keeping my head in safe space. So I got a point taken. And then I'm like, I've lost round one. Now this probably put me behind for round two. And there's only 3 rounds. So you're just like, I've lost, like, right. And I remember going back to the corner and just feeling like, it's an emotional story. Like I'm not going to cry, but like, I can cry when I think of it, like going back to the corner and just was like, and there's the national team head coach, he's telling me what's up. And I just look over to Jill, my head coach. And I'm just like, I've lost. Like, I'm like, I know, like, we're both smart people. Like I'm behind, like big time. And I'm just like, and like so defeated. Oh, I get goosebumps. And then she's just like, you're not done. And she just like the Jill Perry poke. She's poking me. She's like, you're not done. There's another round. You need a killer 3rd round to pull this off. Like, you need to go out there and like light her up. And that's what I did. I went out. I had my superpower as a boxer, I think, was I was very determined and I had really good conditioning. And so I just went and I was relentless. And Jill just said I was on her nonstop, sticking to her and pushing her back. And so I won that round. And I won it big. I think I had a 10-8 round. So at that point, I've lost 1 round, I've won 1 round, and there's a tie for the middle round. So in those situations, they go to the head coach and they have to just pick. It's a tie, right? They have to pick who's the winner. And usually how they pick it is like who's getting stronger as the fight goes on, because that's an indication of who would win if it were to go to another round. And they picked me. So I went from like, it was just such an amazing moment to be like losing 2 out of 3 rounds to turning it into a gold medal victory and just like standing on the podium, having the national anthem playing, seeing my coach there. And like, it was the best. It was awesome. That's the highlight of my career for me.
That's awesome. And sorry, you said head coach, or did you mean head referee?
Sorry. I said head coach, I meant the head referee.
Okay, cool. No worries. Incredible story. Did you journal while you were an elite competitor? Did you do any journaling or
not as consistently as my coach wanted me to?
Okay.
I did. I had like an e-journal, and so I'd like put it was just like Google Doc, and I'd log what's going on in my life and what I'm thinking, and my coach could see it and provide feedback. And so we kind of had a back and forth through that. I also had like a intense spreadsheet where I track my like weight, nutrition, water, sleep. So there was a lot of tracking, but when it comes to journaling, if I could do it again, I would journal more. I think the journaling is a really effective tool for athletes, and I don't think I leveraged it as well as I could have. That being like, I also had a full-time job. So, usually when you're like an elite athlete, you train for whatever 4 or 5 hours a day. And then you spend the other time like recovering, journaling, eating. So I did the best with the time I had.
Of course. Now, I think you mentioned earlier on that you went to grad school, but were you competing while you were in grad school as well?
I think I started right at the end. No, I started boxing at the end, but I wasn't on the competitive stream yet. So when I was finishing grad school and I had gained some weight, and I was like, I want to get fit, fit again. So I'm going to find a sport. So I was doing it, but I wasn't doing it competitively.
Interesting. Now, can you tell us a little bit as to why you decided to go to grad school, what you studied, and is it in any way applicable to the sport of boxing? Just out of curiosity.
Mm-hmm. So I did my undergraduate degree in communications and political science, and I graduated in 2009. So that was after the 2008 economic crisis, right? So there wasn't a lot of hiring opportunities. So I just, we've been in school for your whole life at that point. So I'm like, I'll just keep this party going, go to grad school until people are hiring again. Right. So that's what I did. And I did a master's in communications at Carleton University. And so communications like that, it's communications, it touches on every aspect of life, whether it be interpersonal relationships, sports, uh, fisheries and oceans where I work now. so, so yeah, definitely some overlap into
Did
sport.
how was the graduate experience for us studying communications? How would you describe it overall? Was it a good experience, bad experience? Well, what did you get
Grad
out of
school,
it?
yeah, grad school is tough. Like I occasionally will find papers I wrote. And I'm like, I'm so smart. How was I so smart? So, but I think, and this is grad school is just like this on steroids. But with any degree, whether it be a college degree, undergraduate, master's, it's it's a sense of commitment and hard work to work so hard on something for so long, that there's that going on. And so, um, sorry, I'm losing my train of thought.
Oh, it's all good. I was just asking in terms of like the overall experience in grad
Brutal.
school.
Sorry, it's a grind, like boxing.
Yeah.
Like it's a
Wow.
lifestyle. You wake up, go to the library, get your coffee, and you push hard, and it's a lot of work, but you just have a goal in mind and you're working towards it. It's very similar to boxing. Like, you know, my goal is to medal. What do I need to do to achieve it? And the same with my goal is to graduate. What do I need to do to get that done? And you
Interesting.
just work hard and you get a plan and you just make the plan and work the plan.
For sure. Now, a lot of athletes talk about in training, there's something happens that transforms their entire perspective of their sport, how they even view themselves, or if it's, it's kind of like a major change in their approach, be it in training or how they fight. Did you kind of, in terms of training and refining your overall skill sets, was there one thing that transformed your boxing, like over the years, as a competitor? Was there one thing that really gave you that edge?
um, it's kind of many things, but there's one thing that kind of ties it all together. And again, you'll hear me talk about it all the time because it's so important. But the team around me, my coaching team, everyone was committed to self improvement, including myself. But like my head coach Jill Perry, she's doing a master's degree in coaching. John Edwards, my strength and conditioning coach, he was constantly doing courses, and everyone was just working on what they had to bring to the table and like looking at how they could make it better. So, and everyone also recognizing that no one's above someone else, that you can always learn from other people. So just like a pursuit of knowledge and being willing to evaluate where you're at and being honest about how we could make things better. I think that made a huge difference in making me the type of athlete I was. I was like that, and the team around me was like that as well. So, because you see it often in boxing, you hear like through the community, like a lot of people like don't like centralization with the national team. That they're like, well, I made this boxer. Why am I going to give it to this national body when I put in the work? And they're like, I know everything. Everything they need is here. Like, people often, at least I find in boxing, think that they know everything and that they don't need to improve. They don't need to take this course. They don't need to put in the work as coaches or strength conditioning coaches or athletes. But that's not true. You can always be a better version of yourself. And I think the athletes and coaches and everyone in the community who get to the top are the ones who are willing to do the work to make themselves better instead of just assuming that they're the best.
That's really interesting that you mentioned this commitment to self-improvement. I think that's that's an incredible statement, and that combination of words really speaks to the sort of team you had around you, and how you guys were you and the team were keeping yourselves on focused. But it sounds like you're speaking about the sport like it's a team sport as opposed to an individual sport. Can you elaborate? Is boxing a team sport, at least at this level, at the elite level? Is it a team sport?
No, it's not. Like there's a team behind the athlete, but like I don't think it's a team sport. It takes a village, but there's only one boxer in the ring. Like you travel when you're on the national team with a team, and there is a team element in the sense that like if someone gets eliminated from the tournament and they're all upset that they've been eliminated, and they can be a really negative influence on the team environment. They're just like they've given up, they're distracting, they're staying up late, they're like bringing all this negativity when everyone else is still on the task of competing. So there is a team element, but it is like at the end of the day, it's just you. Like you have to take care of yourself. You like if there's that negative team member, you have to remove yourself from them, or like if you need to do whatever it takes to make sure you're taken care of. Like if you're bound to your hotel room and you have to like they're giving you meals that aren't helping you meet your boxing weight goals or whatever, you need to find a way to get the food you need brought to you. Like, you can't rely. It's a very, you got to do what you need for you to succeed and then rely on the team around you. But yeah, it's I guess it's a bit of both. There's a team element, but it's an individual sport.
That's interesting, and it's interesting as well that everyone on the team, I would imagine, is competitive, right? They're there to win. So
Yeah.
is in terms of the energies, as far as you're talking about negative energy, how's that regulated? If I can ask, how do people?
Yeah, strong coaching. Like the coaches have to identify where, like, monitor the environment and see what's happening and how they can intervene when needed. Sometimes they'll shuffle rooms around, and not around usually like drama or whatnot, but like they could. But it, like, for instance, if you've been eliminated from the tournament and then there's someone who's moving on to the final, and they'll rearrange the room so that athlete can, not always, but like if they want that, they'll rearrange the sleeping arrangements so that athlete has a room to themselves so they can recover and stay focused. Like, so and they're not having that, whether it be positivity or negatively, but they're removing those influences through their team management.
That's really cool. This is all new to me as a fan of various combat sports. So I appreciate that you're sharing that info. Now, of course, you've competed, but now you transition to coaching. So I'm going to ask about that transition. Particularly, what characteristics do you look for in athletes that you're coaching? What do you look for?
It's still quite new. Like I'm a very, very green coach. So, I'm finding my way,
Right.
But for sure, the one thing that I know I'm looking for, and like my coach is now my mentor for me being a coach. So, and she agrees with it too, is coachability. There's nothing worse than when you have an athlete that thinks they know it all. Like you want someone who can show they can listen, whether that be in training, being like, you need to work on this drill because it's a fundamental, or if it's in the ring, being like, I need you to make this adjustment, whether it be keeping your hands up, like fighting on the inside, outside, whatever it is. You need them to be able to listen to you and take that and apply it. Like a lot of boxers, like they just don't have that coachability. They just think they know best, and they're not relying on their coach's eyes and ears. And it's very different. Like when you're in the ring, you can't see the big picture. You need to trust your coaches. Like corner work is so important. And being able to listen in the corner. Like when I talk to my athletes about being in the fight and like between rounds, I'm like, your number one goal between rounds is to recover, to lower your heart rate, to breathe, because that's when you're the most able to accept information. And that's the goal of between the rounds, is for you to hear my 1 to 2 key messages of what you need to do different into the next round. So coachability, hands down. That's what I look for in athletes.
Interesting. And I know you mentioned, that you're new to coaching, but so far, what is your approach to coaching?
Honestly, I don't feel like I have my approach yet because like I retired and then I took some me time before I started coaching. And like I've always like at tournaments and events, I've always been in the corners and helping. So like I have a good sense of what's going on. But and then COVID happened. So right when I finally had a class that was running and stuff, then it kind of fell apart. So but my approach to coaching is very much similar, I guess, to when I was an athlete. And that's like recognizing your strengths and your weaknesses, like not trying to be everything. Like I have a few athletes that I'm still working with online while we're in this COVID era. And there will be things that they need that I can't offer. Like, I don't know. I have a general sense of what they should be doing for strength and conditioning, but that's not my expertise, And so I have to recognize that that's not, and provide them with the resources and the people that can offer them that and like work. And I see myself as a coach, as a coordinator, like this is my athlete. They need this nutrition wise, this strength and conditioning, this boxing, this mental. And I find those resources, those people, and like bring it all together. I'm very much like a project manager for the athlete.
Love it. That's awesome. Now, in terms of professional development for coaches, how much do coaches do like professional development? I think you kind of mentioned that before. Is it important?
So it's so important. Like it's like you can't, like you need to work on being a coach. You're not just a coach because you were a boxer or whatever. You have to learn to be a coach and rely on the like coaching community to figure that out. And there is coursework, and a lot of old school coaches I find are like, no, I know everything that I need to do as a coach. And I don't believe that. And so there's coursework, and you gotta, and like some of it is like required. Like you have to have certain levels to do certain things in the boxing community. Like you have to be like on the national, like at nationals, you have to be like a level 3 coach, I think, to even be in the ring. So, like to be the number 1 coach and giving the instructions, like you need a certain level, and there's a certain amount of coursework required through the province to get that. So like there's bare minimums, but then I think the exceptional coaches are always working on things and taking the courses, and they're always available. I like next week, I might have overdone it. They had a sale on coaching courses. Nice. And so I signed up for a whole bunch because I don't know. You don't know what you don't know. So you need to work on it. And like, even if you take one thing away from the course, that makes you one little bit better than you were before. And that is the difference between like a gold and a silver medal, between winning or losing. Like, so if I can do a course or two to help my athlete, of course I'm going to do it.
Right. And it's fascinating because it's coaching itself is a profession, right? And everyone has to continue that continuous learning. I would imagine is vital. And there's always, I'm going to generalize here, but I'm sure there's always new methodologies to doing things, new tricks of the trade, and so on. If I can ask just to follow up in terms from what you've seen and from what you know, as far as the Canadian model of coaching, if there is a mod, like a boxing model, I know I'm generalizing, how would you say it differs from other countries that send athletes to compete internationally? I know I'm asking, a very specific question, and you don't have to answer it if you don't know the answer, if you don't, because I guess what I want to do is like, is there a comparative? How would you compare a Canadian coach to that of a, say, Cuban coach, or a coach from anywhere else in the world? Like, is there a standardized sort of knowledge base or credentials or?
Yeah, on the coaching front, I'm not as sure, but when it comes to geographical differences for sport, like you see it, like having gone to a few international events, like it's like if the athletes are different, which they are, like you can only assume the coaching is different as well, right? So I would totally say yes. You see different approaches in like the culture of coaching, like the relationship between the coach and the athletes. For instance, when you see the Irish team coaching, training, and granted they have I forget where he's from, their head coach, but he's Eastern European. But anyways, their athletes before each training session, they're lined up and they're standing at attention. Then the coach, like they're super friendly. They're Irish, they're so friendly. But there is a discipline there and a respect where they're like lined up and they're listening and they get their instruction and then they train. So, and then whereas Canada and like we have strengths and weaknesses too, but we're not standing in a line taking instructions. We might be rolling out while the coach is talking. And then just fighting styles are very different geographically, so you can see their training different. So what it looks like on the coaching front, I'm not sure, but you can see from the fighting that there's differences, so there has to be differences in the coaching approach as well.
Yeah, and it's interesting too. I in terms of culture, as you mentioned, because it's like one of the oldest combat sports. It is the most popular combat sport as far as on the professional side. It's more popular than mixed martial arts, right? Because it's the oldest. It's the previous generation's MMA, but it still has that global reach. So you have all these different cultures and involved, and it's, I think in some places in the world, I know I'm generalizing, I think the coach is revered even higher than the fighter, right? Because they're a mentor, they're a life coach, they've really inspired a whole generation of competitors. Now, I'm going to shift to a different question I had here. In terms of like, because all sports have, there's always room for misunderstandings or how sports are perceived by the general public. Like if you're not involved in a sport, you get your information based on whatever pop culture tells you a sport is based on. I guess what I'm doing is framing the next question. As a former competitor, what's the most misunderstood thing about the sport of boxing from your experience as a competitor and so on?
I think a big thing for me, misinformation around boxing, and like I don't have the exact stats, but from being in it a while and like what my understanding is, but like I think whenever I say as a boxer, people would be like, "Oh, concussions," and like what I don't think people recognize is that like my understanding is that boxing is not one of the most high rated concussion sports. Like it's higher in soccer, it's higher in hockey. Like it's actually like, I'm not saying it doesn't happen that you get concussions in sport, but I think people often see it as like a barbaric kind of sport. And so they assume that it's the goal is to hurt someone, which it is. Like, I'm not saying it's not, but I don't think there's as many head injuries as like in comparison to a lot of other sports that are celebrated, and when they're actually they can be quite dangerous. So I think it's a bit demonized in that way.
Interesting. As far as like, I'm going to ask you this question because I think it's an interesting and a relevant one. As far as gender and coaching in boxing, are there many female boxing coaches? And is boxing generally gender, like, is it inclusive as far as having, more females involved, be it as coaches, assistant coaches, and boxers, and so
on? In short, no. Like there's a severe underrepresentation on all fronts, particularly coaching. In fact, there's like a Commonwealth Games coaching development program through the Commonwealth Games where they're trying to get more women into coaching and like create a mentorship program around that, because we're not there, and that's a problem. And so that there is opportunities. It's not like there's an active like movement to exclude women from the sport, but it's more systematic in the sense of cultural. Like it's things like there was like one games where like there was like a coach who was like this was at a young, like it was with youth, and there was one I just heard through the grapevine, but there was a gross coach from a different country kind of like talking to one of the younger athletes, and like we're talking, these are kids technically, like they're like almost adults, but like, you know, and when that athlete raised concerns, like it was kind of like it was acknowledged, but it wasn't taken very seriously. It was just seen as like, oh, you know, just ignore them. But that's a problem, right? You have like an adult creepy male talking to a child, and it was just kind of like, instead of addressing it directly, it was just kind of like, you know, like it's not like, just ignore, like and that's like something that like it sticks with you, right? Why would you want to like participate in a sport where you're made uncomfortable and people aren't taking your complaints serious? Like I've heard of stories of female athletes being like assaulted during medicals, like, you know, and so like that's the thing. Here's a good example. Like I like, and this isn't necessarily for like female specific, but like there was a recent regional tournament, and they wanted like, and there's so many athletes, and so they don't want the coaches going with the athletes into the weigh-ins and the medicals. They're trying to create separation, like line the athletes up, get them in. You don't want extra people like lingering and creating problems. But we're talking like, I had like a kid who was like 9 years old, a boy, and his 12-year-old sister. And I was like, you think I'm going to send these kids downstairs with 200 strangers, most of them like older men, like, and just let them just like, okay, like, and I know there's staff around and like everyone has police checks, but like the other 200 people there don't. And so, and like, as in particular for the young girls, I'm like, this is not an ideal environment. And like we were able to address that. But had I not been like, no, I'm not sending these athletes down there, like they would, you know, it's just a recipe for disaster. Like, and it's not just boxing, that's sport, organized sport in general. There's more that can be done on the safety front.
For sure, and I would imagine that being proactive and voicing these concerns on the spot are always important, right? As far as making this sport more inclusive. And I know that every sport has its own sort of standard as far as, you know, even participation, you know, as far as having a balanced number of female and males. And, you know, in combat sports, I know that judo does a really good job with that. As far as other combat sports, I'm not too familiar. But I just want to shift over to the topic of communication, seeing that you're a communicator and you're also a boxer. How would you compare pro boxing versus international amateur boxing in terms of how it's marketed and promoted? And I mean, we can use examples outside of Canada if you want, or we can stick to Canada. How would you differentiate between that dichotomy between pro boxing and international amateur boxing?
Like they're different sports. Like even though it's boxing, amateur and professional, it's different worlds, different rules. So, and when it comes to marketing them, like there's a sense that professional boxing is marketed pretty well in the sense that like it's front and center. You get like big stadiums sold out. Like it's a big industry. It's making a lot of money. And when I think about international amateur boxing, like it's, unless you're at a major games like the Olympics and Commonwealth or whatever, it's not like, I don't hear about it. So I think I think it's not marketed well at all.
Yeah. Why is that though? Because it's somewhat. I mean, sorry, I'm interrupting you.
No. I'm not sure why, but part of it is, I don't think it's very there's well known that AIBA, like the international orchestrating body for boxing, isn't like the smoothest running ship there is. So it's hard to market something that's so shaky. So
Right.
and when it comes down to it, is where's the money, right? Like things get marketed like they need to be turning a profit. And I think boxing could do a better job of that. I think it's like you were saying, it's the thing about boxing is it's like the most classic traditional sport there is. Like when you think about like Roman times in sports, like you think, at least me, I think about boxing. So I think people, if it was marketed well, would get into it, especially amateur, because it's amateur is about like true sport, and whereas professional is more about, the glam of boxing making money. So,
Right. Right.
but like there's something noble about amateur boxing, and I think people would respond well to it if we put it out there as that, and try to promote it better. But I don't know what's going on, why they're not pushing it.
Yeah, it's interesting and it's unfortunate because I think outside of North America, there's maybe I'm generalizing here. There's a bigger appetite for that sort of content as far as amateur sports, not just combat sports. Like combat sports are, I would imagine, more popular, but I have a bias for that. But I remember even when I lived in South Korea, and I remember there was a sports channel that would broadcast all sorts of amateur international sports. And the funny thing is, like, that's how you expose yourself to, hey, like this sport that you probably are not too familiar with, right? It just starts with that sort of basic exposure to it. But I'm going to move on to the next question here, and this one is it's a loaded one, so bear with me. In your opinion, has social media and communications in general impacted how recreational, amateur, and professional combat sports athletes tell their stories? What are the pros and cons for boxing and other combat sports of having a hyper media savvy combat sports marketing ecosystem? I don't even know what I'm trying to ask you.
Yeah, no, I think I do. I think I get what you're saying. So for me, and like, you're going to find people on different sides of the camp for this one, but every major technology that comes out, people think it's either going to make or break whatever's going on. Like when the radio came out, they're like, oh, it's going to have the ability to connect the country. We'll be one voice disseminating TV. They're like, how is that going to change? Or like, even like the newspaper, people thought that it could fragment communities. Like every new major technology, people think it will either make everything okay or it will turn everything to poop. And so, and I think social media for me, like people think the same thing. They're like, oh, it's either gonna like really take the sport to the next level or it's gonna destroy it. And for me, it's just I think it just kind of reinforces the status quo. That being said, like you can use it for your advantage, and for athletes, like you can use it to market yourself. Being an amateur athlete, like it's hard, like financially, like you sponsorships and getting that attention, like it makes a big difference, like to whether or not the type of training you have, like having the proper food, equipment, whatever, however you're being supported makes a big difference. And so social media is another way for athletes to promote themselves. That being said, it can also be a problem, right? If you have to be very sensitive, like what you put out there, you're building a brand around yourself. Like for instance, there's this one fighter that I follow because small fight community, like my brother trained with him, and he's got signed to the UFC.
Oh, wow.
And I'm like, oh, I'm like really into following him just because I know someone who knows him. But then I see him posting some stuff that like I think is ridiculous, and it's not about fighting, it's about politics, and it's a bit like radical. And I'm like, whoa, like, is this what you want? Like, what if the fight career doesn't work out? Like, what is this the image you want to put forward? And on the other hand, like you can see other people leveraging it so well. And I think people who who use social media super well. Like I always think of Mandy Bujold. She's a 51 kilo national team member. She's gone to the Olympics. And she's created a career out of her boxing. Like she has sponsorships. She has, and now she has a daughter. She had a daughter after the last Olympics.
Is she planning to go back? Isn't she planning to compete in the Olympics?
Yeah, she's back. She's training. Like she's active. Like, she's very competitive still. And so, but you can see that she's built a business. Like she has her training academy. She has an exit strategy for when she's done boxing, and she's built that through social media. And it's super impressive. And you'll never see her posting something ridiculous or controversial. Like there's a brand around her, and it's a very effective brand, and she's going to have an awesome career when she's done being a boxer because she's built this social media brand. Quite impressive.
Really interesting there. And you mentioned that life after boxing. Do a lot of competitors, be it amateur or pro, do they think about life after boxing?
Not a lot, especially in boxing. And it's so important. You see a lot of athletes, like it's your life. Like it was I worked with a sports psychologist for a little bit as I retired, because it's so like your identity and sense of purpose is built around your connection to sport. And then when you're not with the sport anymore, like who are you, right? It's a big thing. And so you need to have a plan on how to get out and how to exit well, so you're still whole as a person. You see a lot of people, they'll retire or they won't retire, and they're just like fighting when they're past their prime and they're getting head damage because they just don't know when to quit, or like they retire from amateur because they can't make it to the next level and they're like, I'm gonna go pro, and like, that they're not going to do well as a pro, but they just don't know anything else but boxing, right? And it's sad to watch. You need to have, like, if you're a serious athlete, it doesn't just stop with competing. It's like you need to plan it all the way through, including your exit and how to live a healthy lifestyle after boxing, right?
Those are very interesting points. Now, in terms of like advice, communications advice, because you mentioned athletes on social media. What one piece of advice, and I think you've answered it already, but I'll still ask you, what's the best communication advice you would give any combat amateur sport athletes when it comes to their online presence and social media?
I guess, and like this is kind of the advice people give to kids, like teenagers who are getting social media, everything is there forever. Like, don't post something that you can't live with, right? Whether it be like a lot of people trash talk, like if like it will just look so petty, or you say something that you can't take back, you discover something, you're just trying to like create controversy and sell tickets. Right. But then you say something that crosses a line, you can't take that back, right?
That's right.
And you've seen, like, who was that fighter she was in the Maldorian series? Yeah, and she posted something recently and she got cut. Like, it's you can't just, what you say, you have to mean, and it's going to be there forever. So don't post it if you can't live with it.
You're 100% right. We have to think about what we say before we publish it on any platform. It's basic 101 stuff. But I'm going to ask you some philosophical life after boxing questions. What has boxing given you?
Honestly, it gave me like all the feels. Like, it gave me like some of the best memories of my life. Like when I think about what I miss the most, I just miss like the community and camaraderie that came with it. Just hanging out with my coaches, like, and the daily grind with them. They made it so, like, even though it was a grind, it was pleasant because they were there. Like, so just like, I'm most grateful for the memories it gave me, that and particularly being on the national team and having the opportunity to represent your country internationally. Like, nothing feels as good as that. Like, I still wear my Team Canada hoodies and shirts, and I feel so proud. The sense of pride that comes with it is just off the chain for work the other day. We had like wear your jersey day, like how to spice up teleworking. And I wore my Team Canada jersey, and then they asked people like, what jersey are you wearing and why? And like I feel so proud to just be like, I was on Team Canada. Like it was awesome. Like so that's what it given me. Great memories and a real sense of national pride.
What do your coworkers say when when they find out that you were, you know, a former international competitor and in boxing and all that? Well, what are some of the funny or interesting comments that they throw your way?
Like once you tell someone you're a boxer, or you were a boxer, that's all they see you as, like professionally. So when there's someone acting up in a meeting, they'll be like, Maria, you need to take care of this. Like, you know, if I come to a meeting and they're introducing me to a new colleague, they're like, this is Maria. She used to be a boxer. Like it people remember it. It makes you stand out. In fact, like often if I go to a job interview, I make sure to drop it in there because people like, and I like tie it in really nice, but like they remember you. Like you want the people who are interviewing you to remember you, and no one's gonna forget that you were a national boxer or a boxer in general.
Big time. It makes a huge statement and says a lot about, you know, all the dedication, the work, the commitment. You know, just describing your routine earlier on in the conversation when you were talking about that pace and routine of like, you know, train, wake up in the morning, train, go to work, then train after, then go home. Like just that continuous flow of train, you know, and not everyone can do it, right? It's quite the journey, and it takes dedication, commitment, discipline, and I mean, you drop that in a job interview. It speaks, I think, loudly in terms of being organized and focused and reliable, right? That's a big one.
Yeah, that's the connection I make. Often when I drop it in, they'll be like, "Can you give it?" Or like I have it on my resume or CV, and they'll be like, "Can you tell us like how boxing applies to work?" And like the connection there, or like there's certain, and I say exactly what you just said, like the planning, the dedication, the knowing when to push, when to pull back. Like I tie it in totally. It makes sense.
Now, the follow-up to that question would be, in return, what has boxing taken away from you? And I know it's probably a harsh question, but and you don't have to answer it or whatever.
Oh no, it's okay.
It's a dance, right? It's a give and take with most things.
What has it taken away? Like it definitely added more than it took away. Like, did it remove a few brain cells? We'll find out.
I don't think so. You sound pretty.
I hope not. Thanks. But things like I had right after I retired, I had or was it before I retired? Anyway, elbow surgery. Like, you know, like it takes a physical toll on your body. Like I'm sure, honestly, I bet you anything that it was a combination of being an athlete and then having a 9 to 5 job. Like it's very hard on the body to just sit there for 8 hours and then go hard. But anyways, definitely had elbow surgery. Like I had like a broken orbital bone. Like, you know, it's like takes a toll on the body, but it definitely like it gave me so much more that it was worth it.
That's awesome. I have one last question for you. I really appreciate your time answering all these questions. And this is a big one here. What's the best life advice you've been given or know that is equally applicable to boxing?
Yeah, no, for me, like when I was in my teens or early 20s, my grandmother said to me, I can't even remember what we were talking about. It's probably school, but she was something along the lines of like, you know, Maria, the hard things in life are the ones that are worth it. Like the things that like putting in the hard work, that those are the things that matter. And that's whether it be boxing or work or personal relationships, like that's it. Like you putting in the work, like if you work hard and like if you want to have the best sport, work, relationship, like you got to put in the work, and it's supposed to be hard because that will make the hard things in life are the ones that are worth it. So that would be it.
Wow. Those are powerful words. Thank you very much for your time. And where can people follow you online if they can?
Oh, I am on Facebook, and it's Marija with a J, Marija, and then my last name backwards, so Naruk, Narruc, and then on Instagram and TikTok. Honestly, like, you think I would know my handle, but I think it's MISSMAAJAA. I probably should have done a better job streamlining those as a comms professional, but it happens.
It's all good. Thank you very much for your time, and all the best.
Okay, thank you so much. Thanks for having me.